You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have a strong show for you today, which is your reward for having survived another week of Trump trauma. Two terrific guests are here. Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who is the author of an absolutely riveting new book, and Kathleen Barry, herself an author, and also one of the founders of contemporary feminism, with a whole new and fascinating idea. But first we have to go inside those headlines. The dust hasn't begun to settle from Republican infights over Trump care, so I think I'll leave that alone for now. I do want to mention an item accidentally omitted last week when I was discussing Trump's speech to Congress. I left out the one good moment, the sight of all the Democratic congresswomen wearing white. It was a response to a call put out by the Democratic Women's Working Group to wear colors associated with the women's suffrage movement in solidarity with women and all things anti-Trump. Way to go, Democratic women. Hard as women in Congress have it these days, women Marines have it worse. The U.S. Department of Defense is investigating hundreds of male Marines who used social media to solicit and share possibly thousands of naked photographs of women, service members, and veterans. Since January 30th, more than 24 women, many on active duty, including officers and enlisted members, have been identified by their rank, full name, and military duty station in photographs posted and linked to from a private Facebook page. Service Women's Action Network, SWAN, noted in response that this is the third prominent incident since 2013 involving significant online targeting of female Marines by male Marines. They also stated that Marine Corps leadership seems unable or unwilling to stop this behavior, and that reprimands with no or little punishment are grossly inadequate. Women in the military are more than twice as likely than military men to suffer from stress, injury, and depression, and the suicide rates of service women are 6 times higher than those of civilian women. This is especially true in the Marine Corps, which has the highest level of harassment and assault rates in all the services. Swan points out that this behavior has its origins at Marine Corps boot camp, since the Corps is the only service that segregates men and women in basic training. Women Marines are also held to different and lower training standards, which creates and perpetuates a view of them as a lesser category of Marine. Swan has repeatedly demanded that as a starting point, boot camp should be integrated, and that furthermore women should be fully integrated into all occupations and units of the Corps and Corps leadership. Reuters news agency has reported that the Trump regime is considering separating women and their children trying to emigrate at the border to the United States from Mexico. The Department of Homeland Security claims the proposal is to deter mothers from migrating illegally to the U.S. with their kids. These are women fleeing countries riddled with drug cartel corruption and with world record-setting rates of violence against women, so much that they use the word femicide as a norm. And these are dangerously violent terrorist toddlers sucking on pacifiers to keep them quiet so they won't be detected in this desperate flight for asylum. If this regime tries to enact this policy, I prophesy that the full might of the women's movement will bring its fury against this regime in ways that simply have never been seen before. You know that blizzard of more than 90 regulations that Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress signed or reversed in the last 6 weeks? They came so fast it was hard to keep track, but here's a partial list. Telecommunication giants like AT&T and Verizon will no longer have to take so-called reasonable measures to make certain that their customers' social security numbers, web browsing history, and other personal information aren't stolen or accidentally released. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, and other Wall Street banks won't be punished anymore for collecting extra money from customers to cover potential losses from certain high-risk trades, the kind that unleashed the financial crisis back in 2008. Also, hunters will no longer be barred from using lead-based bullets, which can accidentally poison wildlife on 150 million acres of federal lands. But all that's minor compared to what's yet to come. Trump wants a 14% cut in the Coast Guard's $9.1 billion budget and deep cuts in airport and rail security, all to help pay for his war on illegal immigration, which security experts say defies logic. He wants to pour that money, however, into hiring more border agents and immigration officers and, of course, build the wall, which we will pay for, along the southern border. Maybe he thinks bad dudes like those toddlers only enter the United States from one place, Mexico. Trump also plans to cut the State Department budget, slashing foreign aid and diplomatic spending by 37%. There go the embassies. His Secretary of State, ExxonMobil's oil man Rex Tillerson, agreed. Do either of them have the faintest idea that the State Department and its embassies are the ones who do the vetting and issue the visas to begin with, or decline them? Speaking of Exxon Rex, human rights groups were stunned when, for the first time ever, the U.S. Secretary of State, that's him, remember, blew off the public release of the State Department's annual Human Rights Report, a widely respected document that's usually released at a major press conference by the Sec State. Rex decided not to get involved, especially since the regime is currently deciding to maybe pull the United States out of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Trump and his boys are expected to roll back stringent federal regulations on vehicle pollution and to dismantle the Clean Power Plan to cut climate warming pollution from coal-fired power plants. And the Trumpists are seeking to slash one of the United States' premier climate science agencies by 17%, with steep cuts to research funding and satellite programs. Proposed cuts to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration would also eliminate funding for external research, coastal management, estuary reserves, and coastal resilience. That last is something that seeks to bolster the ability of coastal areas to withstand major storms and rising seas. If any of the above made you feel more insecure, dwell on this one. Numerous key cybersecurity positions remain unfilled in the Trump regime, lowering efforts to protect federal networks and increasing the risk of a security breach by adversarial hackers. The open positions include the Chief Technology Officer for the government and the two top jobs at the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Wing. Also, the Department of Homeland Security Office of Cybersecurity and Communications lacks a director. You know, it really is amazing how much ill you can accomplish in a short time if you really put your mind to it. Well, you must be pretty stressed by all this. So now for something completely different, way, way inside the headlines. In Sri Lanka, Thailand, a green sea turtle is recovering after undergoing surgery to remove nearly 1,000 coins it had eaten. The turtle lived in a pool where tourists come and throw coins for luck. Approximately 11 pounds of metal were removed from the turtle's stomach. According to NPR, a veterinarian on the scene said, "It's hard to imagine how the turtle swallowed such a large number of coins." Well, apparently that veterinarian has never heard of stress eating. So, if you can find one, go chew on a Susan B. Anthony dollar coin. We have to take a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with my first guest and a discussion about George Washington that is both eye-opening and heartbreaking. So don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And welcome back. My first guest, Erica Armstrong Dunbar, is professor of Black American Studies and History at the University of Delaware. You've seen her in a number of documentaries, including The Abolitionists, an American Experience production on PBS. In 2011, she was appointed the first director of the program in African American history at the Library Company of Philadelphia. She's been the recipient of Ford, Mellon, and SSRC fellowships, and most recently was named an Organization of American Historians Distinguished Lecturer. Her first book, A Fragile Freedom, African American Women and Emancipation in the Antebellum City, was published by Yale University Press, and she's here to talk about her recent book, Never Caught, the Washington's Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave. Professor Dunbar, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is an extraordinary book. It's called Never Caught, the Washington's Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge. Ona Judge should be an American heroine. You will never, readers, never perceive George Washington the same again. It is the story of an extraordinary, actually an amazingly average and extraordinary young woman who was an enslaved woman owned by Washington's wife, Martha Custis, and her escape and the relentless pursuit that while first president of the nation, that Washington and Martha Washington conducted to try to track her down. Most of all, well, start, Erica, with how you came to do this remarkable book.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for the kind words. I feel so just pleased and delighted for Ona that the book is getting so much attention and people feel sort of warmly and just excited about her story. I actually encountered Ona in the archives when I was working on my first book, and I was working on a project about free black, or how women became free in the North. Mm-hmm. And I came across an advertisement for a runaway slave. And it was a runaway slave who had escaped from the household of the president. And they called her Oni Judge, which was, I explained, was the kind of diminutive of her name. Right. She's referred to as Oni, but I call her Ona, which is the name she went by at the end of her life. Right. And so I thought, okay, this is an amazing story. Who is this enslaved person that's run off from the president's house, and what happened to her, and did they catch her? And I kind of just couldn't let go of the story, or perhaps she wouldn't let go of me.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I came back and worked very long and hard on this project, which in total took about 9 years, research and writing.
I'm not surprised. Yeah. I mean, I've read Washington biographies, and of course they don't go anywhere. Well, some of them go near the subject, but none of them goes into this kind of detail. I do think that there's a remarkable, overdue, and cause for celebration explosion of scholarship, it seems to me, American history coming from African American women. On the show within the past year or so, I was checking, and we've had Manisha Sinha, who did the slave's cause, about how in fact slaves were active in abolition. Hello,
sure.
And Carol Anderson's White Rage, which is about backlash consistent down through the centuries, and New England Bound, which Wendy Warren's book on slavery and colonization. But this one, because it is so personal, it is the story of this young woman, and also goes into detail about not only what her life was like and what she was like, because at the very end she did emerge from a lifelong flight and hiding to tell her story, which itself was an act of enormous courage. But it tells us intricacies about slavery that have simply been kept. I was going to say have not surfaced. It's not that they haven't surfaced. They've been kept from surfacing all this time, including slavery in the North. Please tell the story which had me screaming out loud, alone in a room. Oh my God! Just hyperventilating. The story of the 6-month turnaround, because that is so staggering. Go ahead.
Yes, it's a moment that, clearly this is a story that is not representative of George or Martha Washington's finest hour, and of slaveholders in general, the problems of holding slaves in a nation that was moving towards slavery in the South and moving against it or away from it in the North. When Washington moved to Philadelphia, the nation's capital, in 1790, he brought with him 9 enslaved people. And the problem in Philadelphia in particular was that there was a law that said if you were a non-resident and you brought your slaves with you to the state of Pennsylvania, you could only keep them there for 6 months. And after that 6-month period, if you overstayed, they were entitled to their freedom. Mm-hmm. And so this concerned Washington and Martha, and they talked about it among themselves. They talked with the Attorney General, who himself had lost some of his enslaved property due to this law. And so they made a plan, a discreet plan, that was kept between Washington and his secretary Tobias Lear and Martha, and a plan in which they would rotate their slaves in and out of the state every 6 months in order to not necessarily break the law, but definitely break the spirit of the law. Mm-hmm. So Ona Judge and her other kind of enslaved companions would be rotated back to Mount Vernon every 6 months, or if that was an impossibility, they would cross the river into Trenton, into New Jersey, basically stopping the watch of the clock of slavery and of the possibility of freedom. Yeah. And so this is a very kind of calculated, strategic step that the Washingtons employ, and they do it, and they're very careful about it. They say, we want this to be done as discreetly as possible, mm-hmm. so that the people around them knew that they weren't necessarily attempting to break the spirit of the law, but more specifically, to not alert the enslaved who lived within the walls of their home, to not give them the opportunity to think about freedom. And what the Washingtons underestimated was the abilities of the enslaved there to think about freedom, to experience, to see it, to feel it. And Ona really lives with that in the North, comes of age in the North, mm-hmm. arrives in New York and then Philadelphia as a teenager, and by the age of 22, she's lived a life that was very different from what she would have experienced in Mount Vernon, one in which she could see free black people on the streets and Mother Bethel Church being built, mm-hmm. and knew what freedom looked like and made the decision to take it.
Well, I mean, that 6-month rotation that the Washingtons inflicted is one of the most staggering exercises in full knowledge and culpability and cynicism and, quote, discretion. In other words, he knew that it wouldn't sit well. And I mean, one of the things that is so to be cherished about the book is the calm, cool historian's tone in which you depict in which you blow away so many myths. I mean, there's the myth, of course, that the North was never practiced slavery, and there's also throughout this, and you see it in Washington's letters, which you quote, and in writings of the day, this benevolent sort of, well, slavery is a bad thing, and eventually we'll move away from it, but actually, it's so good for the slaves because they are well taken care of. And there's that attitude. And what is quite clear from the rotation strategy, as well as from other comments that he makes in his pursuit of her, is that he knew exactly what he was doing, how ill it would be received, how he did not dare as president to be honest about this, but how his property was property. And even if in the abstract he would take positions which he never completely clearly did, but sort of pussyfooted around against slavery in terms of what you owned yourself. Hell no, I'm going to hang on to that. And the hypocrisy is staggering. Right during the period when he has been lauded by white historians, and probably not unjustly, I mean, I'll calm down eventually, where he's been lauded for not seeking a third term when some of them wanted to, proclaim him king. And indeed, there are people who say he gave the United States its real democracy because he refused to become king. Well, hallelujah. But in the meanwhile, he was king with people he owned. And this is such a service to American history that you've done in surfacing this character, this creature, this woman.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this book was to show us what the early years of the founding of this nation looked like through the eyes of the enslaved.
Yes.
And typically we get it from the other side, right, through founding father stories. And I really felt like Ona was the perfect vessel in that she traveled from Virginia to New York to Philadelphia to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at a moment when the nation was being founded and a moment when nobody knew if it was going to work.
Right.
And we get to see that process through her life as an enslaved person and then as a fugitive. And it's a different narrative, and one that I purposefully wrote in a way that hopefully is appreciated by larger audiences.
It reads like a novel. I mean, you can't put it down because oh my God, will she choose to run now, before? Oh no, she's going to wait a little. Oh my God, oh now she's running. I mean, it has to become a movie.
That's the universal response, and I think it's because at this specific moment in time, I mean, her story is an American story, right?
Yes, it is.
She stands up, she resists, she stands up against great odds and risks everything for the ideal around freedom.
Yes.
And the fact that she does this, and she does this as human property of the Washingtons, is an amazing story that I think people find bravery and courage and resistance, in particular at this moment in time. We draw strength from that. We
do. And it's also, they always say both God and the devil are in the details. And it's in the scrupulous details that you give, whether about the prevalence of a high rate of arthritis among African women, enslaved, because of particular work that they were doing when they were, or whether it's that most people, think of and have been taught, well, Washington in his will freed his own slaves. Well, yes, but she was in the lineage of his wife's enslaved people. Right. So she was not freed by that, would not have been freed by that. So, I mean, these kinds of details, the devilish, demonic intricacies, the cynicism of enslavement come forth in this book more than in any other histories of the time I've read, black or white. And this is an extraordinary one. So I wish we had more time. I thank you for this book. It's called Never Caught, The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge. And Ona Judge should be on a U.S. stamp as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I just hope right now that she was a fugitive for many years, but I know that she didn't want to be forgotten. And so now I really hope that her name will become as well known as a Frederick Douglass, a Harriet Tubman, because she did what they did just decades before.
Yes, and all by herself, and a young woman somewhere in one of the depictions of a runaway slave in the newspaper, she's referred to as delicately built. So we know that she was slight. I see this slight little young woman daring the world, and I love her passionately. And thank you so much for this book. Never Caught.
Thank you.
Erica Armstrong Dunbar we've been talking with, and the book is Never Caught, and Run Out, Do Not Walk, and get a hold of it. Thank you for being with us, Erica, and all good luck on your next project. I can't wait.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Well, we have two items today, both having to do with flying objects. First, following up on last week when we talked about the financial devastation that Palm Beach area was facing the airports and businesses because of Trump's frequent visits to Mar-a-Lago. It's more of a nationwide phenomenon, actually. For example, there are essentially, there's a bubble of restricted airspace that follows the president wherever he goes. There are essentially no-fly zones reaching up to 17,999 feet within a 30 nautical mile radius of the president. A nautical mile is just over a regular mile. So if you fly into that ring without permission from federal authorities, you meet some very not friendly fighter jets. So the policy has been in place since September 11th, the attacks, and it is causing more disruption now than usual because Trump has homes in some of the busiest airspaces for general aviation in the country, metropolitan New York and South Florida. Melania Trump still lives in New York, and Trump himself is scheduled to go back and forth regularly to the, quote, winter White House in Mar-a-Lago. Major commercial airliners and cargo carriers like, Delta and FedEx are unaffected by these temporary flight restrictions because they undergo careful security screening whenever they fly. But general aviation, that's private and corporate flights, flight instruction, sightseeing tours, aerial photography, pipeline and utility inspections, surveying, weather and pollution monitoring, crop dusting, and banner towing aviation, all of these and more have to cease or curtail operations. And aviation businesses now in the New York area as well as Florida say that they're facing significant and possibly ruinous losses. With a few exceptions, like for law enforcement and medical emergencies, aircraft are also now prohibited within a 1 nautical mile radius of Trump Tower in New York. And when and if he comes back to New York, he's afraid to come back to New York. That ring, if he's here, is expected to expand a 10 nautical mile radius covering almost all of Manhattan. This, of course, doesn't bother Trump at all. He's never been worried about inconveniencing people, and he's in fact delighted about Palm Beach County suffering because for more than 2 decades, he's repeatedly sued Palm Beach County over air traffic noise over his estate. At one point, he accused the local airport director of intentional battery by maliciously directing jets to fly over Mar-a-Lago. I mean, he's stark raving bananas. Lawyers for the county responded that they couldn't help it, that the estate is just off the end of the airport's main east-west runway. So there. But here's a more interesting story, and just as surreal, but in a good way. We should never underestimate the power of the bee brain. Bee, yes. It's a newest win for the bumblebees, that they have learned how to push a ball to the center of a platform to get a sugary treat. They like sugary treats. And scientists who've been studying insects of all sorts are pointing out that just because a brain is small doesn't mean it's simple, unless it's lodged under an orange comb-over. It can be a large brain or small. It's very simple. Anyway, a number of recent experiments have shown that insects can solve problems and can learn, although scientists haven't yet been able to define the limits of the mental abilities. But once insects were assumed to be little automatons, that they were hardwired to take certain limited actions, and actually evidence is growing that the abilities even get this, of fruit flies, approach something that, while it isn't quite the same as human thinking, isn't pure hardwired instinct either. Fruit flies, remember? They choose between alternative actions, and they have a kind of internal map of where they are. It's an abstract representation in the brain of the external world. And one of the researchers on fruit flies says, I won't capitalize the C yet, but it's cognition in some form. I mean, fruit flies' brains are the size of poppy seeds, and there aren't that many of them. There's only 250,000 brain cells. But the bee is different. The bee has nearly 1 million brain cells, and they're using them all. Honeybees have long been known to use a tail-shaking behavior. They sort of twerk to tell each other where to fly for flowers with good nectar. And to also classify how good the nectar is. And recently, researchers in London showed that bees could learn to pull a string for a treat of sugar water, but the ball is even more remarkable. Now, on the one hand, I got nervous reading this because I thought they're training bees to, roll balls and but they're not. They're actually trying to discover what bees know. And they think it's surreal, but they, in their own way, think. It's time for another short pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'm very excited because my next guest is an old friend. And if you've ever been curious about what radical feminism really is, stay tuned.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. My next guest is an old friend, Kathleen Barry, a sociologist and professor emerita of Penn State University. Among her books, Female Sexual Slavery and The Prostitution of Sexuality both address the global sexual exploitation of women, and each of those books was a landmark feminist text. She's also the author of the definitive biography of Susan B. Anthony, and she's here today to talk about an exciting new form and format for spreading feminism. Welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program, Kathy. Good to have you here.
Glad to be with you, Robin.
Full disclosure, listeners, Kathleen Barry and I have been friends and sister, colleague, warriors, whatever, at the feminist barricades for many years. Pterodactyls flew in the sky when we first got together since the early 70s, or maybe even late 60s. So it's wonderful to have you back on the program, because I want to talk especially about this new form that you've invented. I was going to say an online course, but that does not cover the profundity of this. From feminist knowing to action, a 5-session program. So tell how it came to be.
Well, that's actually an exciting question, because having survived and persisted through the backlash against our movement in the 60s and 70s, the future of feminism looked pretty bleak until some years ago, when I was introduced to the new young generation of feminists, of radical feminists in particular, speaking at a conference, Radical Feminist Conference, and seeing the kind of, really radical thinking that young women have today, and that this new generation of feminism has. And also noting that it was really important to connect some of the things from what we did and what made our work so powerful to what's going on today. Well, and there seems to be a strong reception to that.
Oh, yeah. No, it is so important. One of the things, and there are many, that I love about the I guess we could call it the syllabus, except that it's not academic in tone. It's vibrant and personal and in English, not in deconstruction talk, and it's alive. But one of the things I love is that you know and I know there are so many myths about feminism, in particular radical feminism, what it is, what it isn't, who was there, who was not. I mean, that it makes me crazy, and sometimes I feel like a dog that is already politely sitting and being yelled at, sit, when the dog is, because, for example, not their fault, because it's not been out there, and because university courses, for the most part, on feminism erase this knowledge. But the whole idea of intersectionality, which God knows is very important, and for people who haven't heard the word, listeners, it was Kimberly Crenshaw came up with it, and to point out that everybody has multiple identities in identity politics, and race and class and gender and et cetera, overlap. And most people, in fact, all people in one way or the other, have more than one. But that it was invented out of a perceived vacuum, as if the women's movement in this country up to that point had never dealt, for example, with racism. And that simply is not true. At least with radical feminists, most of them came out of the civil rights movement, like you and I, Kathy. So one of the things this course does is address the real past, so that people can get the actual straight story of what we're coming out of. And then another is, what in hell really is radical feminism, which I will hope you will mention and talk about.
Well, let me move into that from the intersectionality. Intersectionality is a descriptive term. It does not speak to the actual experience, the experiential level of sexism and racism and all the other forms of oppression.
It's an academic term. It's
it intersects in women's lives. Yes, it is it's multisyllabic. That's the qualification. But the reason, my view is, the reason that the term has taken off and become so important is exactly why I have started this program, and exactly what radical feminism came from and really is, and that's consciousness raising.
Right.
If you have consciousness of oppression, you have deep felt experience of it, yours and other people's.
Right.
And that is something that we honed very, very carefully and over many years through our consciousness-raising group.
And it's still alive. It's still alive. I mean, the minute you get women into, where they will talk about their real lives, they come out so pissed off and so glad it's not just my individual fault, but it's, oh, you too? You went through that? I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. Maybe this is political. And then they can move to action, which you point out. That's the arc of this course.
Is exactly right. An awareness of oppression that we arrive at together in our talk conversations, in our CR meetings. We arrive at it together from our experiences.
Right.
I can remember very strongly the moments that somebody would come in to our CR group. One of the women who was in the group would come in and say, "I am so angry." Yeah. And then as she started unfolding her story, it was all of our stories.
That's right. That's right.
And that's how we learned to understand not just our oppression, but all forms of oppression. And as you said, you and I and many, many feminists had been very active in the civil rights movement, and really struggling against the really deep-seated racism of this country, which I fear we may be headed back into in the
I think we're there. You bet. But one of the things that that you point out is that, well, first of all, you define radical feminism, which in a sense you've just done. That it comes from the personal. A good phrase. The personal is political.
Guess you thought that up.
and also the diversity among. If radical feminism were really understood, this could be acknowledged. But the diversity is that the politics of oppression and of privilege affects women of color, lesbian women, disabled women, young women, old women, all of that you deal with. Let's backtrack for a minute and talk about the structure of how this course happens. It's an online course where you're on Skype and women this has happened in Australia and Great Britain and all over the United States. They gather a group of feminists. What is the minimum number?
Minimum number is 10.
It's 10. It's fee-based per person, but it's a ridiculously humble fee. I've been yelling at Kathy; she should raise her fee. And it opens with your sketching out what does radical feminism, how does it differ from reform and socialist and liberal feminism, what is consciousness, and takes them all the way through in 5 sessions to action. But in between, they meet in consciousness raising groups, don't they?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that is what makes this course, this program, so exciting. The most recent program I did was a group of women abroad, and they got together and rented a cottage because they were from different towns. Mm-hmm. And then we Skyped into there, and we started on a Friday night. And I said, before we meet tomorrow, I want you to have a consciousness raising group, having talked about what consciousness raising is.
Right.
And it had been quite contentious that opening night with the problems that one woman brought up and kind of very accusatory. My God, their consciousness raising group was so revelatory to them that when we opened the session, they insisted on talking about their CR group. And everybody had to say something about it and what happened and what their experience was. So we kind of just, changed my agenda for a half hour or so. But it was exciting. Yeah. And it was exciting to me. It's that kind of energy. It's very easy to talk about what action to take when you have that excitement from consciousness raising.
Well, and because you've experienced it. You're dealing. It addresses so many things. It means that you can't just leave the barricades at a convenient moment. Because you're invested, you have a stake in this. It's not an abstract. It's not a political approach. I'm not saying theory, but it's not a political approach that is based on already existing patriarchal political approaches, like
and you said it earlier,
socialist feminism or liberal feminism or reform feminism. Don't rock the boat. It steps outside that paradigm.
That's one of the other reasons that I was really prompted to do this course, because some radical feminists today are reading what we wrote back then, but it's not coming from their own lived experience.
Exactly.
So when they attach something that I wrote or you wrote to their own lived experience with each other together, that means sisterhood.
Now. That's right.
In the now and in the women bonding that comes from that, then we have a very, very exciting situation. I wanted to add also to what you were saying about the course is there are occasions where people actually raise funds from local community groups or from a university, and then I go to give the workshop in person.
Right.
I think it's equally successful both ways.
For years you've spoken about feminism, you've given lectures, you have an very distinguished academic background, and so you're a very damn good teacher as well as an organizer. But the magic of this is the personal, and the every time it reinvents itself, feminism is reborn every time a woman says, "Oh, you too?" This is a personal approach with one of the founders of contemporary feminism in the United States, and I think it's a absolutely wonderful one. They get to ask her questions. It's cool. So it's called From.
Yeah, we have plenty of time for discussion.
Yeah.
I talk for a while to get my points out, but then we have plenty of time for discussion. And what I'm seeing now is women going out from these groups and engaging other women in these issues. So it's having a wonderful, effect of spreading out and really getting consciousness raising, because that will give the force that is necessary
Absolutely. It puts the blood back in the veins. There's a pulse. It isn't made dry and academic and abstract and boring like deconstructionism or Lacan or any of that. I mean, it's a living, breathing, laughing, crying, oh my God, I didn't know that I was not the only one, explosion of energy, and from that comes action. Thank you for devising this whole new method, Kath. I think it's just terrific. It's called From Feminist Knowing to Action, a 5-session program, and you can find it on KathleenBarry.net and find out more information about it and how to get involved in it and so forth. Thank you, Kath, for doing this and for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Thanks, Rob. This has been really, really fun talking with you about how we got from there to here.
We have to take one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be right back with those fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again with some fighting words. As spring rewards our trust with the first valiant green shoots in the garden, I found myself thinking about trust and about the social compact. It began with locating 3 levels of response to Trump, at least for me. There's the, at times, irresistible temptation to react to each of the tantrums and tweets, which keeps one in a state of perpetual adrenaline output. Or one can pan back to a wider screen, yet stay focused on what he and his regime are doing instead of what he's tweeting. This avoids the deliberate distractions that he dangles like shiny objects before us, and instead helps us strategize. The third level, which is widescreen with IMAX depth, is where we parse what all this might mean. It's an almost philosophical approach, sandwiched, you understand, between bouts of furious activism. I admit I sometimes get dizzy when I find myself teetering on all 3 levels simultaneously, which I bet is a not uncommon experience. For example, I was, first level, venting my spleen about Trump's accusation that President Obama had wiretapped him, especially since Obama's administration was for his entire 2 terms corruption and scandal-free, the first to accomplish that for decades. It took effort to shift my attention to, second level, the regime's assault on health care, and new attempt at the Muslim travel ban, increasing raid and deport sweeps of undocumented immigrants, and the latest Trump Team Russia revelations. That was better, and led me to the third level, the social compact. We're living at a time when established norms for the powerful are intentionally violated, and we need to seek protection under the law. Ours is defined as a government of laws, not of men, certainly not of women, yet. But law requires political will to animate it. There are glorious moments when a government of laws still rings true, as in the Attorney General of Hawaii immediately filing suit against Trump's pretend revised travel ban. Our judicial system should be respected, but improved, greatly improved. Yet laws still rely on those who are willing, like the Hawaiian AG, to employ them in the service of justice. Tragically, such people seem not to exist in Congress's dominant party. The Republican Party, created as the party of anti-slavery, abolition, and women's suffrage, is now populated by people who embody profiles in cowardice. This erodes trust in the law itself. Such erosion eventually atrophies unused law. That is catastrophic, because civil society depends on the social compact, the mutual assumption that we all agree to observe fair laws and to change unfair ones, and we even agree on bargains we make when the limits of law can't stretch into every corner. Bargains like precedent, protocol, standards, traditions, all of which must remain open to growth and revision, or else they become part of the problem, and often have been. This spoken and unspoken law, the social compact, is like an honor system, a core expression of civilized trust in each other and our agreed-upon so-called norms, a thin membrane between us and the chaos threatened by our primitive selves. Those norms apply to your humble but important trust that the plumber did her job, so when you turn on the faucet marked cold, you won't get scalded. And your trust that when the light turns green at the corner, you can confidently cross because cars won't run you down so long as they're facing the red light. That kind of simple trust, which we unthinkingly exercise 100 times a day, is, when you really dwell on it, a kind of miracle. It once extended to trust in our leaders and institutions. Surely my kid is safe alone with a priest, rabbi, or minister. I saw it on the TV news, so it must be true. Presidential candidates always make public their full health records and tax returns, don't they? It's no secret that public trust in those institutions is severely damaged, and rightly so. Religious institutions have been properly exposed as corrupt, abusive to children, and more interested in prohibiting behavior than in promoting ethics or even spirituality. Many journalists were snoring during the rise of Trumpism, and their corporate ownership bosses cynically actually helped his rise. Government has allowed the shrinkage of our middle class, the fracturing of our infrastructure, and the polarization of our politics. But wait, government is not only by and for the people, but of the people. So that's on us. We need to look deeper, to understand that those institutions have been and still are patriarchal. Depleted, they need an infusion of vision the other half of humanity has been offering all along. Women keep proving that, as just a few days ago on International Women's Day, and more men are coming on board, as the Women's March showed. But not in Congress. Though the GOP currently enjoys a monopoly of power, Republicans seem unwilling to challenge Trump. You have to wonder what it will take for them to act like citizens, like elected representatives, unless retaining temporary power at any price is more important to them. It's still possible that one Republican won't merely express discomfort now and then, but will denounce the regime for what it is and vote accordingly. Those moments have occurred down through time, and they make history. But we can't wait for them. We have to make history ourselves. The fate of what the framers termed this great experiment, this republic, rests in our hands. It's our job to disrupt Trump's construction of a fortress America and an ethno-state. So we need to deliberately withdraw our trust that, for example, presidential conduct relies on a somewhat sane foundation of centuries-old mutually approved behavior. Such a withdrawal will save us from being in a permanent state of shock. Follow it unflinchingly, and it might lead to a withdrawal of trust from all male authority figures, from the clergyman to the battering husband who is so sorry and won't ever do it again. Peeling off illusions does not mean rejecting trust itself. On the contrary, once we liberate trust from being embedded in those who hold authority over our lives, we can't help but look around us. And there we see most women and some men doing everything they can quietly, doggedly to save this country. We can trust them, and we can trust ourselves as the new framers of the great experiment. Let that be a fresh declaration of independence from those who betrayed our trust. Let that forge our new social compact. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. And you can check out my own website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, and our founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.